Earlier in the week, British Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson addressed President Trump's executive order temporarily denying entry to the United States to the citizens of 7 Muslim-majority countries and temporarily suspending the granting of refugee status to anyone from Syria. This session of the British House of Commons is about an hour and a half.
Statement, the Secretary of State for Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs, Secretary Boris Johnson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I should like to make a statement on the implications for this country of the recent changes in US immigration policy. In view of the understandable concern and uncertainty, it may be helpful if I describe for the House the consequences for British citizens and dual nationals of the executive order issued last Friday. Let me begin by saying that this is not a UK policy, and it is not our policy, nor is it a measure that this government would consider. I've already made clear our anxiety about measures that discriminate on grounds of nationality in ways that are divisive and wrong. On the 27th of January, President Trump issued an executive order banning the citizens of 7 countries from entering the US for a period of 90 days. Those countries are Syria, Iraq, Iran, Somalia, Yemen, Libya, and Sudan. The order makes clear that no US visas will be issued to citizens of those states, and anyone who already has a visa will be denied entry. The immigration policy of the United States is, of course, a matter for the government of the United States, but on the face of it, this executive order has consequences for some British citizens. For that reason, I spoke yesterday to the US administration, and my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, has today spoken to General Kelly, the Secretary of Homeland Security. I'm able to provide the following clarification. The general principle is that all British passport holders remain welcome to travel to the US. We have received assurances from the US Embassy that this executive order will make no difference to any British passport holder, irrespective of their country of birth or whether they hold another passport. In any case, the executive order is a temporary measure intended to last for 90 days until the US system has added new security precautions. This is, of course, a highly controversial policy which has caused unease, and I repeat that this is not an approach that this government would take. But let me conclude by reminding the House of the vital importance of this country's alliance with the United States in defence, intelligence, which I'm sure they appreciate and understand on that side. On defence, intelligence and security, we work together more closely than any other 2 countries in the world. That relationship is overwhelmingly to our benefit. The Prime Minister's highly successful visit to the White House last week underlined the strength of that transatlantic alliance. Where we have differences with the United States, we will not quail from expressing them, as I have done today.
Order. Let me just say to the House that it is obvious that there is huge interest in this matter, which colleagues can rely upon me to accommodate. I understand the strength of feeling, but the Foreign Secretary's statement, and indeed upcoming his answers to questions, must be heard. The Foreign Secretary.
Where we have differences with the US, we will not hesitate to express them, as I have done today. If they were listening, if the members opposite were listening, as the Prime Minister did yesterday, as she did indeed in her excellent speech in Philadelphia last week. But we also repeat our resolve to work alongside the Trump administration in the mutual interest of both our countries, and I commend this statement to the House.
Emily Thornberry.
Mr. Speaker, let me start by saying this. I'm sure that the whole House will want to join me in expressing our sorrow at last night's gun attack on a Canadian mosque, which left 6 dead and 8 injured. They were all victims of hate, and we are all under a duty to stand up to hate, whenever and in whatever form it appears. I thank this Foreign Secretary for advance sight of his statement. I have to say, I thought there were a few pages missing, but apparently not. And so I hope that, Mr. Speaker, you will allow me to ask some questions on details that were missing from this statement, and also to ask about its timing. First, on the detail. As the Secretary of State knows, there are thousands of people in Britain who live here on a permanent basis, but who are also nationals of the 7 listed countries, and they have no dual citizenship. Many of them are here with indefinite leave to remain, having fled persecution or war. Can the Secretary of State confirm, based on what he has said today, that these thousands of British residents are now barred from travelling to the United States? People like Dr. Hamaseh Taheri, an Iranian national living and working in Glasgow, who on Friday was told that she wasn't allowed to fly home from Costa Rica because she was going to need to change planes in New York. Similarly, if a Somali national with a temporary US visa is currently in the UK visiting their family, can he confirm that they cannot now return to the US under these rules? I hope he can clarify these points. Turning now to the timing of this announcement. This order was issued at 9:45 on Friday UK time. It then took number 10 until midnight on Saturday, a full 27 hours later, to say that they would consider the impact on UK nationals. It then took the Prime Minister until Sunday morning to tell the Foreign Secretary to telephone the White House, and it took him until midday on Sunday to call the travel ban divisive and wrong. That is 38 hours. 38 hours, Mr. Speaker, to have the courage to say what everyone else was saying on Friday night. And finally, 46 hours after the executive order, we got clarification that UK nationals and dual nationals would not be affected. If this was because the wheels in Washington were slow to turn, it might be understandable. But look at Canada. They were immediately in touch on Saturday with their American counterparts, and by that evening they had secured the travel rights of Canadian nationals a full 17 hours before we had secured ours. So can I ask the Secretary of State, Canada is supposed to be 5 hours behind the UK, so why were they a day ahead of us when it came to resolving this issue? And finally, a point on timing. The order was signed barely an hour or two after the Prime Minister had left the White House. Can he tell us, in their discussions about terrorism and security, was this imminent order mentioned? Because I don't know, Mr. Speaker, what's worse, that the President would have such little respect for the Prime Minister that he wouldn't think of telling her, or that he did, and that she didn't think it sounded wrong. If it was the first, it would hardly be a surprise. But if it was the latter, then we really do have a problem, Mr. Speaker. Because when it comes to human rights, when it comes to women's rights, when it comes to torture and the treatment of minorities, President Trump is already descending down a very dangerous slope. And when that happens, we need a Prime Minister who is prepared to tell him to stop, not one who simply proffers her hand and silently helps him along.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I listened very carefully to I think the most substantial point the Right Honourable Lady had to make was about a particular case of a Glaswegian doctor, and I appreciate that there will be all sorts of cases, particularly difficult cases, heartbreaking cases, people who experience a lot of frustration as a result of this measure, which I repeat because I perhaps members didn't follow it first time. This is not the policy of Her Majesty's government. This is a policy that is being promoted elsewhere. What we will do is make sure that all our consular network, all our diplomatic network is put at the service of people who are finding difficulties as a result of these measures. But as I say, because of the energetic action of this government, we now have, by the Prime Minister, by my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, we have an exemption for UK passport holders, whether dual nationals or otherwise. And I think most fair-minded people would say that actually showed the advantages of working closely with the Trump administration. The advantages of having a relationship that enables us to get our point across and to get the vital protections for UK passport holders that they need. And I may say that the approach taken by the party opposite, pointlessly to demonise the Trump administration, would have achieved the very opposite.
Mr. Crispin Blunt.
Mr. Speaker, does the Foreign Secretary welcome the joint statement by Senators John McCain and Lindsey Graham, expressing their fear that this executive order will be a self-inflicted wound in the fight against terrorism?
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend. I think possibly what the interventions of Senator McCain and Senator Graham show is that this is a subject for lively debate on Capitol Hill, as it is here in this House. And I repeat that this is something that we do not support. It's not a policy that we agree with, and it's clear from what my right honourable friend says that there are others in the US who don't agree either.
Tasmina Ahmed Sheikh.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Foreign Secretary for advance sight of his statement. Without a thought to the context, on Holocaust Memorial Day, President Trump issued an executive order to ban those born in 7 predominantly Muslim countries from entering the USA, including, and I quote, those bad dudes who are actually the real victims of violence who are fleeing the conflict in Syria. This action is inhumane, it's racist, and it's immoral. And I welcome the fact, Mr. Speaker, that this House is now treating the threat posed by President Trump with the seriousness that it deserves. We also, on these benches, would like to pay tribute and support the strong statements that have been made on this issue by Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, and welcome the work that's already been done by so many. You can learn some lessons from Scotland's First Minister. And pay tribute to the work being done by so many on the ground in Scotland, particularly Women for Independence, Mr. Speaker, who provided moral and practical support to those who have been unjustly affected by this despicable action. But can I ask the Foreign Secretary, given the Prime Minister's blossoming and frank relationship with President Trump, did she know in advance that the President was to issue this order, which has concerned so many of our citizens? And does he agree with senior national security experts in the US and elsewhere that this will have national security implications for the UK, given that the US administration has now adopted Daesh's false narrative that theirs is a conflict between the West and Islam? If we want to be a global leader, this government needs to show global leadership. Where is it? The Prime Minister has been tested, and she has failed on this, her first challenge.
Well, as the Honourable Lady will know, when it comes to tackling the scourge of Daesh, and she's absolutely right, this country is the second biggest contributor to military action in strikes against Daesh in Iraq and in Syria, and we continue to be the second biggest donor to the humanitarian crisis in that region. And everybody in this House should be incredibly proud of the leadership that
population live here. For the Sundarbans to support so many predators, the plants and animals that live here have some unique solutions to the problems of living in a swamp. It all starts with a very strange tree. The mangrove. In this thick mud, most plants would quickly suffocate. But the mangrove has a spectacular solution. All these vicious-looking spikes are actually snorkels, allowing oxygen to reach the roots deep in the thick mud. But this air supply only keeps the tree from dying. For the mangrove to really flourish, it needs the helping hand of an animal that only appears at low tide. This swamp is home to millions of leaf-eating crabs. Including the fiddler crab. A vastly enlarged front claw gives these fiddler crabs their name. Because when they're feeding, it gives the impression that they're playing the fiddle. They also wave them at any adversaries in a show of size and strength. But they come in particularly handy when engaging in claw-to-claw combat.
Respect. Mr. Speaker, I have already made my views about this. I don't see. It is up to members of the House of Commons if they wish to exhaust the wells of outrage in the denunciation of this policy. I've made my position clear. I made it clear yesterday. I said it was right. I said it was wrong to promulgate policies that stigmatise people on the basis of their nationality, and I believe that very profoundly. What we have done in the last few days, is to intercede on behalf of UK nationals, which is our job, and UK passport holders, and we have secured very important protections for them.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
Trump is what we might call a known unknown. We know that he will do and say unpredictable things and often just as quickly abandon those positions. He will learn as he goes along. And what we have to remember is that our security and that of Europe depends on the Atlantic Alliance. So does my right honourable friend agree with me that there must be no question of our refusing to welcome him to these shores in the hope of setting him along the right path as soon as possible to our mutual benefit?
Well, my right honourable friend is entirely right in the sense that the Prime Minister succeeded the other day in getting her message across about the North Atlantic Alliance, about NATO, and President Trump affirmed very strongly his commitment to that alliance. It's vital for our security, particularly the Article 5 guarantee. And the new President is, I think, very much in the right place on that. And it is totally right, that, and he said so, it is totally right, of course, that the incoming President of our closest and most important ally should be accorded the honour of a state visit. That's supported by this government, and the invitation has been extended by Her Majesty the Queen quite properly.
Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is not just about the impact on British citizens. Yes. One of our closest allies has chosen to ban refugees and target Muslims. And all he can say is that, well, it wouldn't be our policy. That is not good enough. Has he urged the US administration to lift this order, to help refugees, and to stop targeting Muslims? This order was signed on Holocaust Memorial Day. Which makes it for the sake of history, for heaven's sake, have the guts to speak out.
As I say, it is open to MPs opposite on all sides of the House to come forward with yet fresh expressions of outrage about the presidential executive order. I have made my views, and they're entitled. I have made my, and I share the widespread disquiet, and I have made my views absolutely clear. I've said that it's divisive, I've said that it's wrong, and I've said that it stigmatizes people on grounds of their nationality. But what I will not do, which is what I think the party opposite would do, is disengage from conversations with our American friends and partners in such a way as to do material damage to the interests of UK citizens. What we have secured are important protections for people in this country, and that is the job of this government.
Simon Burns.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given our newfound closeness with the Trump administration, what plans does my right honourable friend have to try and persuade the administration after the 90 days to abandon what to many is a despicable and immoral policy? And would my right honourable friend agree, in paraphrasing a far wiser president, John F. Kennedy, that those that ride on the back of a tiger end up inside it?
Well said, Burns.
And I'm sure that the words of the right honourable gentleman will be heard in Washington. But all I can say is that we will continue, Mr. Speaker, to engage with the administration to make our points about the interests of UK nationals, and of course, wait for it, and of course, to convey our feelings about the global consternation that this measure has caused.
Mr. Hilary Benn.
Mr. Speaker, could the Foreign Secretary clarify what would be the position for an Iraqi national resident in the United Kingdom whose child is working in the United States and is a dual British and Iraqi citizen in the event that that child died? Would her mother be able to travel from London to the United States to bury her daughter under the current US arrangements? And if not, would he agree with me that that would be quite simply inhuman and outrageous?
Yes, of course it is possible to create all sorts of hypothetical situations which are yet more outrageous. But the answer, as far as I understand the matter, you will appreciate that it is up for the US to explain this aspect of their policy. The answer is that such a case would be treated very expeditiously, and particular arrangements would be put in place to ensure that that person was able to travel to the US.
Order. I will do my best to accommodate the extensive interest in this subject, but can I gently and perhaps tactfully point out that members who toddled into the chamber after the Foreign Secretary's statement had begun should not be standing. It is in defiance of the conventions of the place, and I'm sure they wouldn't be so unreasonable as to think that they would have a right to be called, because that would be perverse, and they wouldn't behave in a perverse way, I feel sure. Sir William Cash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that the United States Congress and the courts, as well as the President and diplomacy, will play a part in arriving at a solution over this question, does my right honourable accept there is a universal threat from jihadists, and that Europol itself, as an example, have estimated there are up to 5,000 jihadists who've come over from several of these countries, and that furthermore we should also remember the victims of 9/11 in New York, 7/7 in London, Paris, Brussels and Berlin, not to mention Lee Rigby.
Of course, Mr. Speaker, we understand the threat from jihadists both at home and abroad, and that's why it's ever more vital that we work with our American friends to combat that threat.
Mr. Dennis Skinner.
Will the Foreign Secretary, just for a moment, try to recall along with me as I hid underneath the stairs when two fascist dictators, Mussolini and Hitler, were raining bombs on towns and cities in Britain. Now this government's hand in hand with another fascist, Trump. And what I say to him, do the decent thing and ban the visit. This man is not fit to walk in the footsteps of Nelson Mandela.
Well, I hesitate to say it, but the honourable gentleman's memory must be at fault if he thinks Mussolini rained bombs on this country. But I hear the comparison that he makes. I don't accept that comparison. I believe it's our interest to work with our American friends and partners to show our disquiet where that is appropriate and to get the best deal for UK nationals and dual nationals.
John Redwood.
When President Obama imposed a similar ban on a single country in 2011, American democracy ensured it did not last and other action was taken. Can't we rely on American democracy this time to do the right thing and take the right moral pose? And isn't it British ministers' jobs to speak for British policy?
My right honourable friend is entirely right, and indeed the member for Reigate has already pointed out that there is disquiet about this policy already on Capitol Hill, and I have no doubt whatsoever that the American political system will help to introduce the requisite balances in the end. It's our job to intervene now and get the best deal we can for UK nationals.
Mr. David Lammy.
In November 1938, a then Conservative government prepared a bill that led to the kinder transport that transported Jewish refugee children to this country. Doesn't the Secretary of State realise that in making his statement he should uphold the Geneva Convention and speak truth to power in the United States? He's let the House down and his job down.
I have to say that I think the honourable member is taking sanctimony to new heights, and in fact most fair-minded people would say that we have been very clear with our friends in America that we don't agree with their policy. We disapprove of discrimination on grounds of nationality, and but we've worked with them to get the best possible outcome for UK nationals and dual nationals. But we have also made clear to the American administration, as I'm sure he would approve of, the widespread consternation that is felt by individuals such as him around the world.
Anna Soubry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I congratulate the Foreign Secretary in condemning America's policy, which on any standards is completely unjustified. I am also, like many of us, delighted that Sir Mo Farah is apparently now going to be able to go home and see his wife and his children. Would the Foreign Secretary agree with the words of Sir Mo Farah when he described this policy as being based on nothing more than prejudice and ignorance?
I savour the rare congratulations from my honourable friend on any matter whatever, but I'm delighted, of course, particularly delighted that Sir Mo Farah is able to continue to go back to the United States, where, of course, he trains and is able to get fit to win the many medals that he does.
Angela Eagle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Foreign Secretary knows that this policy is counterproductive, immoral and wrong. His attitude and his approach has been to get an exemption for UK citizens from it and invite the perpetrator of it to a full state visit. This doesn't seem like the wholehearted condemnation that this House would deserve. And what is he going to do to make it absolutely clear, in no uncertain terms, to this American administration that this kind of discrimination is counterproductive, wrong and immoral?
Well, to the right honourable lady, she's just said that the policy is counterproductive, immoral and wrong. I've said that it's divisive, discriminatory and wrong. If anybody thinks there's a substantial difference between our two positions, then I invite them to write to me and explain.
Nadine Zahawi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I commend the Foreign Secretary on the work he did through Sunday into the night to ensure that Britons have safe travel to the United States of America. Can I further ask him whether he's had clarification from the administration that they have now updated the advice to their embassies, because there's some confusion that some embassies are still turning dual nationals away and not allowing them to enter the United States of America?
I'm thrilled that neither my honourable friend, with whom I've travelled many times, nor Sir Mo Farah will be affected by this presidential executive order, and I can confirm that the embassy advice has been updated, Mr. Speaker, as we've been speaking.
Hal Williams.
Speaker, most of us condemn xenophobia without hesitation, and we reject racism almost by instinct. Which of the Prime Minister's great British values informed the first initial response to Mr. Trump's order?
The Prime Minister's primary duty, as the honourable gentleman will know, is to the safety and security of everybody in this country, to protect their rights and freedoms. And that is what has been achieved by the agreement that we have struck. And he will also know that she was first out of the box, very early out of the box, in saying that she disagreed with this policy.
Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I congratulate my right honourable friend of making those words in our passport allowing Her Majesty's subjects to travel without let and hindrance a reality. and also on being the first minister to come to the dispatch box to defend domestic policy in the United States since Lord North. And can I encourage him to defend our interests as he is doing, and not seek to tell America how to run itself?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend. I'm not seeking to defend or indeed to explicate or to rationalise in any way the policy of the presidential executive order. I merely seek to explain how it may affect UK nationals, duals, and what we have done to mitigate the effects of that executive order.
Luciana Berger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Friday, it was Holocaust Memorial Day, and the Prime Minister told us that our commitment to remembering the Holocaust is, and I quote, about more than words. She said that it is about standing up to prejudice wherever it is found today. Why then on Saturday was the Prime Minister unable to adhere to her own call to action?
The Prime Minister made it very clear that she did not agree with the policy. She did, and I have made it absolutely clear, and I've made it abundantly clear several times now in the course of these proceedings that I think that the policy is entirely a matter of the United States, but it's my view that it is divisive, discriminatory and wrong.
Bob Neill.
The Foreign Secretary is to be congratulated upon working to protect the rights of British nationals. But will he also consider that he's not telling an ally how to run their own country to remind them in very calm and very firm terms that our shared relationship is based upon a mutual respect for the rule of law, both national and international, and that persisting in this policy does America no good in that regard at all?
I completely agree with my right honourable friend, and I would just point out that we are more likely as a nation to get a hearing in respect of these vital issues if we treat our partners, our friends and partners, our long-standing friends and partners with the respect that they deserve.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It seems that fake news has come to the House of Commons with a vengeance, because the Foreign Secretary has just stood up to say that our Prime Minister was one of the first out of the blocks to condemn the words from President Trump. She certainly was not. We've heard it was 38 hours. And her failure was something that shames this whole country. I'm proud that more people in my constituency of Brighton Pavilion have signed that petition to stop this state visit than any other, because they recognise that our Prime Minister has been involved not in diplomacy but in complicit with tyranny. What does he say?
Well, I say to the right honourable lady that her constituents are, of course, perfectly at liberty to sign the petition. They're perfectly at liberty to express their views. I've expressed my views about this measure, but I also think it'd be a good thing if the visit went ahead, because the relationship between the United Kingdom and the United States is the single most important geopolitical fact of the last 100 years, and we're going to keep that relationship going.
Sir Nicholas Soame.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I strongly agree with the Foreign Secretary of the vital importance of this country's alliance with the United States. But would he agree with me that whatever others may do, refugees arriving in this country will be dealt with patience, courtesy and respect?
Secretary.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for his point, and I'm glad also to see that the bust of his grandfather has been rightfully restored to its place in the Oval Office. And of course I would remind him that it was Winston Churchill who took a very strong view that a country should be able to control its own borders and its own immigration policies.
Mr. David Winnick.
I don't think the Foreign Secretary understands, Mr. Speaker, how so many people in this country feel such contempt for what Trump has done. But can I clarify what he said earlier? If indeed this visit of this wretched man, picketing man, is going to take place, can we be reassured that under no circumstances will he address Parliament in Westminster Hall? That in itself would be a disgrace.
I'm sure that the mood of the Chamber of the House of Commons will be reflected in all discussions about how the visit is to go ahead, but I think we should bear in mind that he is the elected head of state of our closest and most important ally, and there is absolutely no reason why he should not be accorded a state visit, and every reason why he should.
Sir Edward Lee.
Well, certainly if we got the Queen to have tea with the President of China, I don't see why she shouldn't have tea with the President of America. Has not our security for 70 years depended on this special relationship? And in those terms, and in terms of our prosperity with a future trade deal, was not the visit of the Prime Minister an absolute triumph? And we're all thoroughly proud of her. And isn't the first fruit of this special relationship the Foreign Secretary has ensured the rights of British citizens?
I must say that I do agree with my right honourable friend about the Prime Minister's visit. I do think it was a very great success, and they evidently kindled an important relationship, and the parallels that were drawn extensively in the US commentariat between Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, and between our Prime Minister and the new American President, were, I think, very apposite, and we can look forward to a new era of security and stability working together with the US.
Mike Gapes.
Mr. Speaker, the British Embassy in the United States has a very important page on a website where it shows the lists of presidential visits to the United Kingdom. Can the Foreign Secretary confirm that George W. Bush was president for more than 2 years before he made a state visit, that Barack Obama was president for more than 2 years, and that many previous presidents didn't have state visits at all, although they did visit this country in their duties? Why on earth has Teresa the Appeaser got him here within a few months?
The Honourable Gentleman will have heard the response to what he said, but my immediate reaction is that the matter, I didn't require any assistance, the matter is one of taste rather than of order. And I certainly don't need any help from the Honourable Gentleman, who wouldn't have the foggiest idea where to start. The Foreign Secretary.
Well, then, Mr. Speaker, may I say, with your guidance, therefore, that I do find it distasteful to make comparisons between the elected leader of a great democracy, and 1930s tyrants. I really have to say, I think it is inappropriate. As for the protocol. As for the exact protocol, Mr. Speaker, of when the visit should take place, that is something about which obviously the Honourable Gentleman cares very deeply. I can't give him any guidance about that. That is a protocol matter.
Keith Simpson.
Can I offer the Foreign Secretary my commiserations at being sent out to bat on a very sticky wicket? Would he perhaps tell the House that when he intervened in Washington, was it through the State Department or the President's son-in-law?
Foreign Secretary.
I'm grateful to my honourable for that ingenious question, but I'm sure that the House will appreciate that we have very good relations at all levels now with the US government. My right honourable friend, the Home Secretary herself, has had an excellent conversation today with General Kelly of the Homeland Security Department, confirming the very important exemptions that we've achieved for UK nationals and for dual nationals.
Tom Brake.
Mr. Speaker, the Foreign Secretary doesn't like outrage, so does he understand the dismay felt by millions of Britons at the Prime Minister's failure to condemn immediately and unequivocally Trump's Muslim ban, and does he acknowledge that this ban may have increased the risk to British citizens in the 7 countries affected by the ban?
Mr. Speaker, I think I'm simply going to have to repeat what I've already said about 15 times this afternoon about my own views on this policy, which I think are exactly the same as the right honourable lady for Wallasey, I think. I think it's divisive, I think it's discriminatory, I think it's wrong. That's our position. He can find all sorts of other adjectives if he chooses. Let him reach into his thesaurus. Exhaust the wells of outrage by all means. We've made our position clear. We've also secured an important exemption for UK nationals.
Sir Gerald Howard.
As recent barbaric attacks across Europe demonstrate, we all face a continuing threat from Islamic fundamentalism, which we are all trying to address in our different ways. Whilst we may not have adopted the same policy as the United States, surely this is a matter for the newly elected administration in America, its courts, and that our position has been immensely enhanced by the fantastic visit by our right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, where Britain now has influence thanks to her.
May I just say something in defence of that great democracy, the United States of America, which is that if you look at all the migrants in the world, all those who are living in a country other than the one in which they were born, fully 20% of them are in the US. 45 million people in the US were not born in that country, and I do not think that you could credibly say that that country is hostile to those from overseas. And of course it's vital that we work with the United States in combating terror and that we deepen our relationship as we are.
Sir Ian Paisley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I congratulate the government on a very successful visit to the United States of America and for putting the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland top of the queue. Does the Secretary of State recognise a touch of the double standard when people from Ulster have been told for decades they must talk to the most objectionable people, work with the most objectionable of people, be in government with them, and yet then by the same people are then told that you must not have the President of the most democratic country of the world brought to this country? Can I encourage him to ensure that the state visit proceeds? And can he also give some advice to Northern Ireland citizens who currently hold Irish passports but are entitled to full British passports? Should they be applying for British passports for ease of travel to the United States?
I completely agree with the point that the honourable gentleman rightly makes, and President Trump and his administration have not, to the best of my knowledge, been engaged in terrorist offences on mainland Britain, unlike those, of course, with whom he and his party were asked to negotiate.
Sir Desmond Sway. Given the reservations that he has expressed and the mitigation that he has secured, what further opportunities will there be in order to maximise our influence? And can I suggest that the return visit by the President is a rather obvious one?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for that very good thought. The presidential visit will, of course, be an occasion for deepening that relationship, for having further such conversations. I'll be meeting my US counterparts, I think, at the Munich Security Conference in just a few days' time.
Karen Buck.
Mr. Speaker, in addition to the general dismay, does the Foreign Secretary realise that those of us with constituencies with large Muslim populations, and in my case the largest Arabic origin population in the country, are feeling deep concern and anxiety? Many of them travel regularly to America for work and family reasons and are looking for the strongest possible reassurance from the government. But can he help me on one specific point? A school party, a very diverse school party, will be leaving in a few days for America. A couple of the students have already been refused visa waivers. Will he do what he can to ensure smooth passage for those students who are going to America to study the great tradition of American democracy?
Secretary.
We will, of course, do everything we can to help the party of schoolchildren she refers to and to make sure that they have a great trip to the US. And we'll, if there are any difficulties with their visas, we'll achieve it. As for the Muslim minority, the Arab Muslim minority in her own constituency, of course we must speak up for them and defend their interests and rights, and that is why we've made the points that we have about the needs of duals and the needs of UK passport holders.
Ben Howlett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also commend my honourable friend for his statement of condemnation. The Foreign Secretary aware of the speech in 1940 by Winston Churchill, where he said, "Each one hopes that if he feeds the crocodile enough, the crocodile will eat him last," in reference to those countries that remain neutral in the war. This dangerous trend towards nationalism, which we've not seen since the 1930s, inflicting itself upon the Western world, has wrongly been defined as populism. And it's clear that this executive order needs to be condemned. Does my honourable friend agree with me that this House must make its stand here and now, for the weight of history stands on our shoulders?
Foreign Secretary.
I completely agree that we must stand up against bigotry and nationalism, but I must say that I do draw the line at the comparison that has been made relentlessly this afternoon between the elected government of our closest, most important ally, a great democracy, and the tyrannies, the anti-democratic, cruel and barbaric tyrannies of the 1930s. And I think continuing to use the language of appeasement demeans the horror of the 1930s and trivialises our conversation.
Pat McFadden.
The reason that people feel strongly about this is because of the great love held for the United States in this country and in this chamber. The Foreign Secretary is right to say that our deep friendship brings the ability to be candid, but strength also brings the ability to be candid. And isn't the lesson from the weak response to these announcements is that desperation leads to the opposite of candour?
I think that the important point I would stress again for the House is that this government has earned the right to speak frankly to our friends in the US, and we've made our views about this measure, which, as the House will have heard already today, my views are ad idem with the views of the Honourable Lady, the member for Wallasey, and other members here today. The Prime Minister does not approve of this measure, but the important thing to do is to talk to our friends and partners in the US, to reflect and relay some of that global consternation that we detect, but to get a positive outcome for UK nationals.
Henry Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I congratulate my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, for securing those rights of dual British nationals. But will he undertake to look into the case where some Middle Eastern and other Asian countries refuse the dual nationals from this country from entering those countries?
Speaking with other foreign ministers as well about these matters.
I am aware, thank my honourable, I'm aware that there are other countries in the world, particularly in the Middle East, that do themselves ban the citizens of at least one country from entering their own.
Yes. Chris Leslie.
Why did the Foreign Secretary make no reference at all in his original statement to the American suspension of the refugee programme? And shouldn't our Prime Minister have echoed the words of the Canadian Prime Minister by saying that we welcome those fleeing persecution, terror and war, regardless of faith?
Absolutely.
Secretary.
Our policy on receiving refugees has not changed. We have a good record in this country. The United States, to best of my knowledge, has taken about 12,000 Syrian refugees alone. And as I said earlier on, I don't think anybody could reasonably fault the United States of America as a great recipient of migrants from around the world. If you look at the numbers, 45 million people in the US, not born in that country, it is a very distinguished record.
Andrew Bridgen.
Does my right honourable friend share my disappointment that so many members of this House have got so used to us not having control of our own immigration policy that they appear to resent another sovereign country having control of theirs?
My honourable friends puts it bluntly but accurately. I think that it is absolutely. This is whatever you may think about this policy, and I think there's a wide measure of agreement about this policy across this House. It is the prerogative of the President of the United States, the prerogative of the American government to do this.
Ian Blackford.
The world is in an increasingly dangerous place, and if the special relationship is to mean anything, surely as friends of America, we should be deploring in the strongest possible terms and saying to President Trump that he must desist. It's not about the anxiety that we read about in the Foreign Secretary's statement, it's about the leadership that we must show in order to deliver peace and security in the world.
Secretary.
I think with great respect to the honourable member, must have failed to pay attention during the previous 15 answers I've given on exactly that point. We don't agree with the policy, but we engage with the United States to improve it.
Gerald Gillen.
I know the Foreign Secretary understands the fear that this executive order has struck into the hearts of some of our British citizens, particularly as under the Obama administration in my constituency, British citizens of Iranian extraction had their bank accounts closed at UK banks, ostensibly because of US banking rules. Can I urge the Foreign Secretary not to disengage from the USA, but to seek protection and assurances to ensure that this executive order will not lead to further personal financial sanctions for British citizens originally from these 7 countries?
I think the Right Honourable Lady makes an excellent my right honourable friend makes an excellent point, and I just remind the House that the reason these particular 7 countries have been singled out, and there's been a certain amount of confusion and controversy about this, is because they were in fact the 7 that were selected by the Obama administration for the withdrawal of the visa waiver scheme for anybody who had been to those countries.
Mr. Keith Vaz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am sure that the 3 members of this House were born in Yemen are grateful to the Foreign Minister for allowing us to travel to America. But the position of a British citizen who happens to be an aid worker in Yemen or has visited Yemen for humanitarian purposes, they are caught by this ban because the United States will not allow, as I understand it, he may have other information, those who visited or worked in Yemen, even though they're nationals of Britain, to visit the United States.
I'm very grateful to my the right honourable member for, and I know that he was born in Yemen, and I know that there must initially have been in his mind some anxiety about exactly how he would be treated were he to go to the US. I'm happy to say that he will face no obstacle whatever because he is a UK passport holder, and nor will any UK aid worker in Yemen, because that is what we have achieved.
Jake Berry.
Speaker, we didn't need the executive order to be signed to realise that this was President Trump's policy, because after all it was an election pledge. In an election he then went on to win. If, as we should have known that this was going to happen, did the Foreign Secretary raise this issue at his meeting with President Trump's transition team, or did the Prime Minister raise this when she met President Trump, given that we should have known about it and should have done so?
The reality is that conversations between the administration, the new administration, and the UK government have been going on for many months. We, I have to say, became aware of the policy when it was enacted by the President on Friday evening, and since then we have worked very hard to secure the exemptions and protections that we have.
Angela Smith.
Mr. Speaker, given that the Foreign Secretary has said today that the US President's policy is divisive, discriminatory and wrong, can the House safely assume that he will strengthen any representations he makes on this policy to the US, our friends in the US, by working closely in cooperation and partnership with our counterparts in the European Union and the Council of Europe?
Mr. Speaker, we already work very closely, hand in glove, cheek by jowl, locked at the hip with our friends and partners in the EU on matters of common foreign and security policy, and will continue to do so, by the way, once we have left the European Union.
Nigel Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very grateful to the Foreign Secretary for his statement, and many thousands of people will be comforted that all British passport holders will be able to travel into the US, and those that have the legal right to be here will be able to apply for a visa. Now, there are 7 countries on President Trump's list banning their citizens from entering the US for a period of 90 days. Every one of these countries bans Israeli passport holders from entering their country. Has the Foreign Secretary had any representations from dual British-Israeli citizens regarding this immigration policy, which is similarly divisive, discriminatory and wrong?
Well, I think I'm very glad that my honourable friend pointed that out. I had alluded to it already in an elliptical way, but I think it's right that the House should be aware of that discrimination, that ban that already exists. And by the way, the House should also reflect on the fact that all immigration policies, all visa policies, are by their very nature discriminatory as between individuals and indeed as between nations.
Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Foreign Secretary is right about one thing. We've got lots of friends in America, and I stand with our friends there today who are standing up against this ban that affects Muslims and others from these countries. But can I turn the Foreign Secretary's attention back to the humanitarian cause in the Middle East? Many of those affected will be people who've been striving to save lives in Syria, Iraq and elsewhere. So what contact has he had with humanitarian leaders to make sure that they can travel to the States if they need to?
It's very important. The conversations that we've had, what I can say about the conversations we've had so far is that where there are people who, for particular diplomatic or political reasons, or indeed because they're aid workers, have reason to travel, then there should be expeditious systems for ensuring that they get through fast. And that implies also to some of the people who are resident in this country but do not have either dual or UK nationality.
Bill Quince.
Mr. Speaker, the Foreign Secretary has already touched on this point, but 16 countries currently forbid admission to Israeli passport holders. What the US is doing is without question misguided and wrong. But does my right honourable friend agree with me that we should be consistent in our condemnation?
Secretary. I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for raising a point about which I think many members of this House will actually have been ignorant until this afternoon. So well, there you go. They knew it. In that case, why did they keep silent?
Carol Monaghan.
Many in our academic community, of course, are not British passport holders. And at the weekend, my constituent, Hamasa Tari, a specialist vet at Glasgow University, was prevented from boarding a flight because the flight involved a transfer at New York. The Holocaust didn't start with the gas chambers, and only days after Holocaust Memorial Day, the parallels are clear. Whilst I welcome the Foreign Secretary's condemnation, will he condemn these restrictions in any discussions he has with his US counterpart? And can he assure the House that the price of trade with the US will not be our complicit acceptance of these new rules?
Secretary. Very briefly, I've said already in my answer to the right honourable lady who speaks from the front bench on this matter that insofar as the Glaswegian vet is concerned, we are aware of the particular problem there, and we will do everything we have within our consular power to help her out. As for her repetition of comparisons that have been made all afternoon between these events and the Second World War and the Holocaust, I have to say it trivialises the Holocaust.
Dr. Tania Mathias.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Foreign Secretary for his statement? Can I also ask him to make it clear that while America pursues this terrible and divisive policy, which I utterly condemn, that the United Kingdom will always be a place where refugees are welcome, will always be a place where refugees are made to feel welcome, and in that spirit, will he join me in praising and thanking voluntary groups like Refugees Welcome in Richmond that do great work in this field?
Absolutely. I can assure my honourable friend that we will continue to be a great open society here in the UK. I was very proud when I used to be Mayor of London that 40% of Londoners were born abroad, including myself, I may say. And yes, she's repeated condemnation of the executive order this afternoon, which has been heard across the House. It is not my place, as I say, to defend or to explicate that policy, but it is there for 90 days and 90 days only, and it will be subject to the full scrutiny, of debate on Capitol Hill, and we've already heard that there is doubt there too.
Roshanara Ali.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. President Trump's decision to issue this executive order is deeply divisive and dangerous. It's sent shockwaves around the Muslim world and Muslim communities across Europe, including here in this country. Mr. Speaker, as a Muslim, I find it deeply worrying and disturbing, and I find it deeply fearful for us to live in this country in the midst of reprisals already in countries like Canada. And when political leaders amplify tensions when they fail to show courage and leadership and stand up in the face of division and hatred, then we send the wrong message. Can I appeal to the Foreign Secretary and the Prime Minister to show courage and leadership and also take steps to provide protection for those communities who are feeling very, very worried about their safety across Europe after this executive order?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Of course she is. I agree very much with a lot of what she had to say, and that's why both the Prime Minister and I have taken the line that we have about this measure. And secondly, she speaks of hate crime, and she's absolutely right to do so. And I don't want to see anything that stigmatises or entrenches divisions or causes communities to feel unwelcome, whether it's in this country or elsewhere. I think that is absolutely wrong. Absolutely wrong. And we take hate crime very seriously in our country, and I think we can be proud of some of the achievements we've made in the last 10, 20 years in cracking down on those who foment mistrust and division between our communities.
Robert Jenrick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thought that the Prime Minister's speech in Philadelphia was one of the best expositions I've heard in recent years of the importance of the Atlantic Alliance. And I would urge all honourable members who doubt that to read her speech and see why this is a relationship that is worth holding on to. And would my right honourable friend, in considering these issues, see the warm response that the Prime Minister had from congressional leaders and redouble our efforts to reach out to them across the aisle as wise counsels and friends of the United Kingdom in Washington?
I completely agree with my honourable friend, and there is a wide measure of agreement across the Atlantic about some of those essentials which unite us. The importance of NATO and our collective Western defence, the importance of promoting our values, our beliefs in freedom and democracy, the rule of law, equalities, human rights. Those are shared by many, many people in the Republican Party on Capitol Hill. And of course, they also share our strong desire to develop our trading relations with a new free trade deal. And that was, I think, one of the great achievements of the Prime Minister's visit.
Lucy Powell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I have to say to the Secretary of State that I found the emptiness and the hollowness of his statement today to demean his great office of state. Given that during President Trump's campaign, he very clearly set out that he had a policy for banning Muslims, does he agree that this executive order amounts to banning Muslims?
Secretary. No, as you will understand, it does not amount to that. Certain states have been singled out, and as I've said, I believe that to be wrong in the sense that it discriminates against people on the grounds of their nationality.
Richard Drax.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When President Obama came over here during the EU referendum, he voiced his concern of what we were trying to do. And we told him in no uncertain terms it was none of his business, it was entirely due to ours. While friends should be able to speak to each other, does my right honourable friend agree with me that the American people have voted Donald Trump to be their president, and it is their business how they defend their borders?
I do agree with him up to this point, that I think it is also our duty, as many members of the House have said today, to make our views clear to the American president about this measure. We don't like it, we do disapprove it, we do think it's divisive, discriminatory and wrong, as I've said repeatedly, but as he rightly says, it is a sovereign government of a friendly country, and they have taken this decision by due process.
Order. I'm keen to accommodate remaining interest. If colleagues have been listening, they'll have noticed that the Foreign Secretary has been giving pithy replies, and I would ask now for pithy, single-sentence questions without preamble. If people want to go for preamble, can I very politely say, keep it for the long winter evenings that lie ahead. We don't need you today. Mr. Adrian Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What assessment has the Foreign Secretary made of the impact of this executive order on British foreign policy objectives in the Middle East and other areas in the world with substantial Muslim populations, and how would a state visit from President Trump assist them?
Foreign Secretary.
Of course, most countries in the Middle East are exempt from these provisions, but we will work with the incoming administration to address all the crises in the Middle East, including those affecting the countries concerned.
Sure.
Mr. Speaker, can I congratulate the Foreign Secretary on standing up for British nationals? It's right that we remain a close friend of the United States, but as a candid friend, can he also point out to the administration that we should steer clear of policies which could act inadvertently as a recruiting sergeant for Daesh?
We have been extremely candid with our American friends and partners, as indeed I've been candid with the House this afternoon about our reservations, and they include the grounds that my honourable friend has mentioned.
Sharon Hodgson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I repeat the question from the Shadow Foreign Secretary that he didn't answer, in the hope that he will? In light of our special relationship with the United States, why did it take the government of the United Kingdom over 17 hours longer to get the same assurances that the Canadians got much quicker?
Foreign Secretary.
It is our duty to secure the best possible deal for citizens of the United Kingdom. What Canada does is a matter for Canada. I have no knowledge of what deal the Canadians may or may not have secured. I think it's important for the House to understand this was an executive order that took many departments of the American administration, caught them on the hop, as it were, and it has taken them some time to elaborate the policy that we now have.
Mr. Philip Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As Donald Trump is the democratic elected president of our closest ally and our single biggest trading partner, who is carrying out a promise that he made to the American people in their general presidential election, can I commend the Foreign Secretary for standing firm on the state visit, which is absolutely in our national interest. After all, if pursuing policies that the UK government didn't agree with, or pursuing policies in a ham-fisted manner, barred any country from a state visit, then no country would ever get a state visit.
Foreign Secretary.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend. So to the best of my knowledge, both Nicolae Ceausescu and Robert Mugabe have been entertained by Her Majesty the Queen, and I think most members of the House would concede that it is our duty and the right thing to do to put in preparations now for receiving our friend, our partner, and the leader of the oldest of a great democracy and the most important ally that we have.
What a great relief it was for those of us who didn't have to meet either of them. John Woodcock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Foreign Secretary share my concern that the reciprocal ban imposed by Iraq on US nationals may damage the bids to further increase stability and security in that fragile country?
I'm very aware of that particular problem, and I've heard representations already from Iraqi politicians. There are, as the Honourable Mayor and gentleman will know, there are specific exemptions for those involved in politics or diplomacy, and I hope that their applications will be treated expeditiously by the US.
Mr. David Nuttall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree that whilst of course we can say that we would not have such a policy in the UK, interfering in the affairs of another country can be counterproductive, as President Obama found out when he tried to influence the outcome of the EU referendum last year?
Foreign Secretary.
That is entirely right, and as things turned out, I was rather grateful for President Obama's intervention. But I think that if I may say to the House, Mr. Speaker, I think we've got the balance just about right. It's very, very difficult. We've had to be clear with our American friends and partners, but we've also had to secure important protections for duals and for UK citizens.
Paula Sheriff.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State earlier referred to matters of taste. Well, I personally find a man who refers to grabbing a woman by the pussy very distasteful. My tearful constituent called me yesterday to say he was devastated by the Prime Minister's failure to condemn the actions of President Trump. Does the Secretary of State agree?
The Honourable Lady will know very well that the Prime Minister has herself said several times that such language is unacceptable.
Mr. Peterbone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I thank the Foreign Secretary for coming to the House and answering such a full way, and you, Mr. Speaker, for allowing such a debate so that we can move swiftly on to the pension bill afterwards. Could I ask the Foreign Secretary if he's got a very special friend and they've been invited to a big party, which is a better way of influence them, banning them from the party or taking their hand and saying to them quietly what you'd like them to do?
I think my honourable friend makes the point very, very elegantly. We do not agree with this policy. We do not support it. It is not something that we would do ourselves, but we think the best way to effect change and to influence the White House is to engage and to be as positive as we possibly can.
My keenness to accommodate colleagues is undiminished, but can I very tactfully say that if people feel that they're going to add further insight to our proceedings by their contribution, they can, of course, continue to stand, but it's not compulsory to do so. Margaret Ferrier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister wants to do business with President Trump, presumably in the same way she does business with Saudi Arabia and the UAE, Muslim majority countries not on the ban list. Not a single terrorist attacker on US soil has come from one of the 7 countries on the list, yet 90% of the 9/11 hijackers were from Saudi and the UAE. Has the Foreign Office made any assessment of potential conflict of interest between the President's personal business dealings and his domestic policy?
Well, I'm afraid the Honourable Lady must have been momentarily thinking of something else when I pointed out earlier on that these 7 countries were those already singled out by the Obama regime for very substantial visa restrictions.
Flick Drummond.
Mr. Speaker, I will be attending a UN conference in New York in March. Can the Foreign Secretary assure me that as a British subject born in the Yemen, that I and others like me will not be detained at immigration at the airport for questioning?
Foreign Secretary.
Yes, I certainly can. If she has any problems, get on to us.
Chris Bryan.
Ceausescu, Mugabe, and for that matter Putin did all indeed have state visits, but none of them were invited to address both houses of Parliament. Whose idea was it that Mr. Trump should be invited to do so? Was it the Foreign Secretaries, the Prime Ministers, or whose?
I like the way the Labour Party is obsessing about points of protocol, Mr. Speaker, but all this has yet to be determined.
Raymond Chishti.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Foreign Secretary has said British citizens should be treated on equal basis regardless of religion or ethnic origin. Can I say this to the Foreign Secretary? When I entered the United States before being a Member of Parliament, on 2 occasions I was stopped at the United States immigration and asked what country I was born in. Well, I was born in Pakistan, but I'm a British national. Can the Foreign Secretary agree with me that anyone who faces this should write to the Foreign Office so we have a record and we can make appropriate representations to the United States?
Yes, and I think I would point out to my honourable friend that this, of course, I assume took place under the Obama administration, and it is something that obviously I'm very happy to receive correspondence about. But again, he and every other possessor of a UK passport will be free to travel to the United States without let or hindrance.
Pithiness personified, perhaps, from Mr. Pound.
Thank you very much. As a man of Catholic literary taste, the Foreign Secretary, I'm sure, will be as familiar with that great book, The Art of the Deal, as I am. In that, Mr. Trump says that a good negotiating position is to start with something so utterly outrageous that will incite fury from throughout the world, and then move to something which may initially seem outrageous, but by comparison seems almost reasonable. As a responsible Foreign Secretary, he will have analysed possible future actions by the President. What conclusions has he drawn?
I think the conclusion that anybody looking at the President's electoral rhetoric and what he is in fact doing, any reasonable person would conclude that his bark is considerably worse than his bite, and I think we have every opportunity to do a very, very good deal with him on all sorts of things, not least a free trade deal.
A short sentence. Mr. Peter Grant.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. What assessment has been done by the UK Government of the risk to which his honourable friend referred a few minutes ago, namely that the Islamophobia being propagated in America may make it easier for Daesh to recruit terrorists to operate in the United Kingdom?
Secretary. I agree with the phenomenon to which, or I understand the phenomenon to which he alludes, and we all need to work harder, and we need to work together with our American friends and partners to tackle that sense of exclusion and isolation which can drive extremism.
Stephen Doughty. Thank you, Mr Speaker. When it comes to refugees, women's rights or torture, you're either on one side or the other. Can the Foreign Secretary explain how many refugees will we take to offset the ban? How many women's organisations will receive additional funding from us to offset the cut in their funding from the US government? And will he rethink that state visit, that honour, that highest honour?
Foreign Secretary. As I said earlier on, this country has a proud record of taking refugees and indeed of funding international organisations and of campaigning for female victims of sexual violence in conflict. We have done, I think, more than any other country in the world to do that, and we continue those pledges. And as for his point about the state visit, which has been made repeatedly this afternoon, I repeat my point. Her Majesty the Queen has extended that invitation. It is right and proper that it should go ahead, and it will.
Sir Ian Murray.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Could the country come to the conclusion that the Government and the Foreign Secretary's response to this abhorrent and pernicious policy is that her government is so desperate for a post-Brexit trade deal with the United States that they're willing to become an apologist for the Trump administration?
I think that any fair-minded person, having listened to what has happened over the last 48 hours, would understand that far from supporting the policy, far from acquiescing in the policy, far from approving or agreeing with the policy, we have worked with the incoming administration to modify that policy and to secure important protections for UK nationals and for dual nationals.
Dr. Lisa Cameron.
Many thanks, Mr Speaker, and I refer the House to my register. Given a number of psychologists have now suggested that President Trump displays traits of narcissism and may be dogmatic in policy approach, how will the Foreign Secretary seek to reason with him moving forward? And will the Foreign Secretary be seeking psychological opinion himself?
Foreign Secretary. Yeah, look, irrespective of the psychological traits of various world leaders, in which I'm sure the Honourable Lady is an expert, I haven't had a chance to consult her register of interest to discover whether she is indeed a psychologist. We will work with the President and indeed with all our friends and partners to get the best outcome for our country. And the partnership with the US is absolutely vital, for not just for our security and stability, but for that of the entire world.
Shabana Mahmood.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. This order doesn't stigmatise just on the basis of nationality, as the Secretary of State says. It stigmatises on the basis of faith. Yep. This is a Muslim ban, and that has been admitted by those that the American President asked to help him implement his Muslim ban legally. So why is the Secretary of State persisting in pretending that these people are not doing the very thing that they are themselves telling us they are doing?
To the best of my knowledge, Mr Speaker, the President has himself dissociated himself from that characterisation of this policy. And I just remind the House that these 7 countries do not comprise the entire Muslim world, and indeed they are the very countries that were singled out by President Obama for thoroughly restrictive visa regulations.
Roger Mullin.
Given the Trump administration seems intent on trading in man's inhumanity to man, when was the first time the Secretary of State called his opposite number to express his disquiet?
Secretary. As the honourable gentleman may perhaps know, my opposite number, my putative opposite number, has not been finally confirmed in office yet, but we've had abundant conversations with representatives of the Trump administration about this policy.
Yes, Phillips.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I wonder if the Foreign Secretary can comment on the blog currently that has just come up on from Gary Gibbon at Channel 4 that states that Theresa May, the Prime Minister, was told of the US refugee ban was coming prior to the signing of the executive order. Can the Foreign Secretary confirm or deny that fact?
I don't comment on confidential conversations between the Prime Minister and... I don't comment on confidential conversations between the Prime Minister and the US President, but what I can tell the House is that as soon as we had a full understanding of the measure that they had brought in, we decided to intercede to get the protections that we needed.
Mr. Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, when the Prime Minister visited the United States and Trump held her hand, did he whisper sweet nothing in his ear, or did he tell her what his intention is going to be? And will he remind the Prime Minister, no deal is better than a bad deal?
I totally agree. I'm afraid I couldn't quite make out the earlier part of the Honourable Gentleman's intervention, but I totally agree with the last bit.
Mr. Speaker, Holocaust survivors have said that this reminds them of the 1930s. So is this a time for appeasement or a time for standing up for British values?
I think it's time for perspective and time to stop demeaning the Holocaust.
Mrs. Madeline Moon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was in Washington last week with the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. While there, members of NATO, the administration, the high officers of state of the United States, congressmen, senators, took us apart and said, stand by us because our values are under attack with this administration. Does the Foreign Secretary appreciate what comes out of here and the statements we make are very important for those Americans who want to fight to retain their values?
Yes. I thank the Honourable Lady for what she's doing with the NATO Parliamentary Assembly. It's very important that we do talk to our friends and partners within NATO about the vital importance of that organisation. And she's right, we have many friends on Capitol Hill who agree profoundly about the importance of NATO, and so indeed do many people in the the new Trump administration. But the way to nail those arguments down is to engage with the Trump administration in the way that we are doing.
Joanna Cheney.
Mr. Speaker, the ban affects the resettlement of refugees from 7 countries, many of whom have been waiting for years in the camp and were cleared and ready to go to the US before the ban came in. What will he do to use this much vaunted special relationship to speak up for the rights of these people who are themselves victims of war?
Foreign Secretary. We've made our position clear on this policy. We believe that the US has a proud record of taking refugees. They've already taken 12,000 from the Syria conflict, and I hope that they will think again.
Christian Matheson.
Mr. Speaker, does the Foreign Secretary not share the concern granting this invitation to the President, whereas it might get us some short-term brownie points within the new administration in Washington, will lose us respect and trust across many, many more other countries with whom until recently we share the same common values of decency, tolerance and respect?
I want to turn his entire proposition on its head. I think other countries around the world are looking to us to engage with the new American administration, to reflect their concerns, to get across our key messages on NATO, on trade, on the values that unite us.
Kirsten Oswald.
Mr. Speaker. The shameful lack of immediate condemnation and the insular complicit platitudes from the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary are a disgrace to this House. The government often talks about its global influence, but they don't seem to have the influence, or is it the guts, to condemn this disgraceful racist order. And why is it that he seems unable to condemn the impact this will have on some of the most vulnerable people on the planet, simply because they are Muslims?
I must say in all candour to the Honourable Lady that it strikes me that her question was composed long before she actually came to this statement and heard what I have had to say. Because any fair-minded person listening to what I have had to say about that measure and about what the UK government has done over the last 48 hours could not conceivably have put things in the way she did.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Foreign Secretary agree with me that regardless of the exemption for UK nationals, the Trump presidency is tainted by this bigoted and immoral ban?
that the Prime Minister is tainted by her hand-in-hand association and that he is tainted by his craven complacency.
My right honourable friend makes for a sedentary position a very important point that the leadership of the Labour Party is currently in the hands of somebody who advocated talking to the IRA not so many years ago, and possibly still does. What we are advocating is engagement with the government of the most powerful nation on earth, on which the security of the world depends.
Kate Green.
Cannot the Foreign Secretary understand why this is perceived as discriminatory towards Muslims? The 7 countries are Muslim majority countries, and the President himself has said that those of minority faiths from those countries, including, for example, Syrian Christians, will be exempt from the order.
I don't think there's much to choose between us in our perspectives on this. I've said already, repeatedly this afternoon, that I believe this measure to be divisive, discriminatory and wrong, more or less parroting the words of the honourable lady opposite. In fact, she parroted me. That is my view. Insofar as this measure may turn out to be counterproductive, which is the view of many honourable members, that is also a point that we are making.
Jonathan Reynolds. Accept the point that this sort of action is exactly what ISIS want, because it plays into their false narrative that the West is anti-Muslim. And therefore, what President Trump has done, Foreign Secretary, is not just immoral, it is a threat to our national security, and that is why we cannot be seen to endorse it.
Foreign Secretary.
Everybody understands the scope and the extent of the challenge that we face from radical Islamic extremism, and I understand the point that the honourable gentleman makes about the danger of pushing people into a corner and making them feel more isolated, and he's quite right to raise that. But we are working with a huge coalition of Muslim countries, many of whom, of course, are completely unaffected by this measure, to defeat that extremism and that radicalisation.
Stuart Malcolm MacDonald.
Did the Foreign Secretary at any point in his conversations raise the Geneva Convention and the obligations that the US government has to it, or was that left to Chancellor Angela Merkel?
I think at the risk of repeating myself, Mr. Speaker, as I've said several times already this afternoon, we have expressed our clear views about the policy, both in respect of refugees and in respect of migration from the 7 named countries.
Daniel Zeichner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend for Birmingham Yardley raised an important point a few moments ago to which the House didn't get a full answer. It would appear that the Prime Minister was told about the refugee ban in her talks. Can the Foreign Secretary confirm that was the case, and if so, what was her advice to the President?
I think I gave the answer a moment or two ago, which is that I do not comment on the confidential conversations that take place between the Prime Minister and her opposite number. What we have done is work with our friends in the White House, in the State Department and in the Department of Homeland Security to understand exactly how this measure is to be implemented and to make sure we secure the protections that this country needs.
Alison Thewlis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. James Rotger, my constituent, emailed me to say, being received with the pomp and ceremony of a state visit will be presented by Trump and his cronies as ringing endorsements from the UK, and therefore, unfortunately, Scotland too. Does the Foreign Secretary not appreciate that we are being judged by the friendships we keep and the way in which we react to them?
I understand the feelings of many people around in this country and around the world, and they've expressed themselves. I've seen the numbers in the petitions. I'm just going to repeat my point to the House, which is that it is our job as a sensible government to work with the most powerful democracy in the world, whose leadership is absolutely indispensable for our security, for the stability of NATO and the Western Alliance. That is what we are going to do, and it is entirely right, as every other president before him has come to the UK, that Donald Trump should receive a state visit.
David Perkins.
Mr. Speaker, does the Foreign Secretary realise that the special relationship with the Americans, partly based on the strength of our leadership and its candour, rather than its weakness and compliance? And does he recognise how much it undermines that special relationship when we have a Prime Minister fawning over the President rather than standing up to him?
Look, I think it would be obvious to the meanest intelligence that we have not complied meekly with this policy, but we have sought changes and improvements so as to protect the rights of UK nationals and of dual nationals who may have been born in the 7 countries that have been identified.
Yeah. Well said. Natalie McGarry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A country must be judged by the company it keeps. How would the Secretary of State answer if history judges that it took the Prime Minister so long to condemn President Trump's executive order because after cozying up to him, the Prime Minister was instead off to sign trade deals to arm an increasingly dictatorial and out-of-control President Erdogan?
Yeah. I really must say, I refer the Honourable Lady to what I said earlier, but I would add that the Prime Minister, during the time in which the repercussions of that executive order were being felt in the US alone, was actually in transit to Turkey and was involved in another very important visit where she secured a fantastic deal for this country, an agreement to supply Turkey with British-made fighter planes.
Seema Malhotra.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The US has been a leader of so much that is best in the world, and this policy has let the US down and the world down. Mr. Speaker, could the Foreign Secretary confirm whether he knew that the Prime Minister knew in advance? Was he asked to brief her, and if so, what did he say that she should say in response before the executive order was signed? And if he did know, did he make any preparations in advance of this coming into force?
I've answered that question already with great respect, Mr. Speaker, and I don't comment on the conversations that take place between the Prime Minister and between her opposite number.
Patrick Grady.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over 4,000 of my constituents have signed a petition against the state visit. Over 100 of them in the last 2 hours since the Foreign Secretary was on his feet, so he's clearly not convincing many people. What opportunity will they have, if the state visit does go ahead, to peacefully and visibly protest?
Please, well, I'm delighted that 100 of his constituents have been waiting with bated breath for him to get that question finally off his chest. I can't remember what it was, but all I can say is that the views, forgive me, I hope the honourable member will forgive me, the views of his constituents are important. They clearly disapprove of the prospect of a visit by the President of the United States. I must humbly and respectfully say to them that I think it is in the interests of this country that, as with every other President of the United States, Donald Trump should come to the UK.
Martin Doherty-Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful for the Secretary of State coming to the floor of the House this afternoon. Does he not agree with me that it's striking that supposedly the largest democracy on earth has excluded 4 nations whose citizens have killed the most American citizens in the American homeland over the last 40 years? If this is a decision of defence, it's clearly one that's lacking, because there's not the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, there is not Egypt, there's not Turkey, and nowhere is United Emirates. Is the United States making a big mistake?
I'm afraid that the honourable member cannot have been listening when I pointed out, I think I point out now for the 3rd time, that the list of the 7 countries in question was drawn up not by the Trump administration but by the Obama administration when they implied their own thoroughly restrictive measures on people travelling from those countries.
Order. I'm grateful to the Foreign Secretary and to colleagues. Point of order, Tasmina Ahmed Sheikh.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I find myself in the unfortunate position of having to make this point of order, to which I've given you prior notice, and indeed I've given the Right Honourable Member from Mid-Sussex prior notice too. During my response from the SNP benches to the Foreign Secretary's statement, I understand that the Right Honourable Member from Mid-Sussex, who's always afforded me courtesy and respect, was making woof-woof sounding noises to what I was saying, which I find, of course, extremely disrespectful. This is an opportunity, Mr. Speaker, through yourself as Chair, if that's not the case, for the Right Honourable Member to set the record straight, and if it is in fact the case, perhaps for you, Mr. Speaker, to know whether that is indeed in order. Hear, hear.
The Honourable Lady for her point of order and for giving me the courtesy advance notice of it. The Right Honourable Gentleman is in his place, and of course I would want to hear from the Right Honourable Gentleman.
Mr. Speaker, I, like you, thank the Honourable Lady for her kindness in warning me that she was going to complain of this. I thought that in her question to the Foreign Secretary, she snapped at him a bit at the end, so I offered her a friendly canine salute in return. No offence was intended, and I apologise to the Honourable Lady if she was offended.
Well, I think we should... Order. I think we should leave it... Order. I think we should leave it there. I thank the right honourable gentleman for what he has said.